Okay, so just to make sure again, if you can hear any echo, type 1. But if the audio is all good, can you help to type 2? Okay. All right, thank you very much. We'll be starting our webinar now. So my name is Farah. I'm from MIM, and I'll be your host for today's session. And before we begin, just a quick housekeeping note. First is that the session will be recorded for our internal reference, and we'll be covering key topics including governance frameworks, compliance best practices, anti-corruption measures, and global perspectives on ethical leadership. And lastly, if you have any questions during the session, please drop them in the chat box and we'll gather your questions and address them during the Q&A segment. And ladies and gentlemen, before we begin, I would like to take just a few minutes to share about who we are and what we do. And for those who may be new to us, the Malaysian Institute of Management, or MIM, was established in 1966 to nurture generations of professional leaders. For nearly 6 decades, MIM has been building capability, confidence, and credibility across industries, helping leaders grow and organizations thrive. Today, we continue to shape leadership excellence through our professional development programs, corporate partnerships, and national events. And today's webinar, held in partnership with the Basel Institute on Governance from Switzerland, is part of the ongoing effort to advance governance, compliance, and ethical leadership alongside the diploma and certification programs. Now, at the heart of our work are 4 strategic pillars, which are membership, professional certifications, capability development, and events and conferences. And at the foundation of these pillars lies MI membership, a gateway to lifelong professional growth. Our members are a part of a vibrant and diverse leadership community that enjoys access to member exclusive rates for MIM programs and certifications, strategic networking opportunities that connect professionals, experts, and industry leaders across sectors, youth empowerment initiatives that inspire and equip the next generation of future-ready leaders. MIM membership represents a shared pursuit of excellence where leaders grow, connect, and elevate together. And moreover, our professional certifications span a wide range of professional domains, including governance and compliance, AI leadership, ICF certified coach, and the HRD Corp Train the Trainer certification. Each program is designed to blend knowledge with application, equipping professionals not only to understand frameworks and policies, but to lead ethically, manage effectively, and create sustainable organizational value. And under our capability development pillar are MIM's short course programs structured around 4 key competency areas. First is the personal competency. Second is the people management and leadership. Third is business management. And lastly, organizational development. Through carefully designed courses, MIM supports professionals at every level in translating knowledge into measurable performance and leadership excellence. MIM also provides platforms for thought leadership through our events and conferences. This year alone, we have convened national level dialogues on themes such as AI, sustainability, and DEI. In addition, our Tunku Abdul Rahman lecture series continues to attract prominent thought leaders, including renowned global voices like Professor Kishore Mahbubani, the former president of UNSC. These engagements reflect our commitment to expanding perspectives and inspiring leadership conversations that matter. And beyond corporate leadership, MIM is also committed to nurturing future leaders through our youth development initiatives, such as the Tun Razak Youth Leadership Award and immersive 5 days and 4 nights expedition in collaboration with Outward Bound Malaysia. We also have MIM National Game, which is a business simulation challenge that we just concluded a few days ago. We also have Young Leaders Networking and Toastmasters Speechcraft. Through these programs, MIM remains committed to investing in youth to create a stronger leadership pipeline for Malaysia. This webinar is part of MIM's ongoing partnership with the Basel Institute on Governance, through which we deliver a suite of initiatives including the Diploma in Corporate Governance and Compliance, webinar, podcast, and conference, masterclasses and short courses, articles in MIM Focus, and also the residential program in Basel, Switzerland, which will be happening next year in 2026. MIM also takes pride in being the only global partner of the Basel Institute on Governance, offering the Diploma in Corporate Governance and Compliance, which includes 3 certifications: the Certificate in Corporate Governance, the Certificate in Compliance and Certificate in Anti-Corruption Compliance. This partnership reflects our shared mission to advance ethical leadership and compliance standards in Malaysia and beyond. Now, ladies and gentlemen, in regard to today's topic, conflict of interest is an issue that sits at the heart of good governance, both locally and globally. Around the world, we have seen how unclear boundaries between personal and professional interests can erode trust, undermine decision-making, and expose organizations to serious reputational and regulatory risks. Here in Malaysia, it remains a central topic in corporate governance conversations as organizations strengthen their integrity and transparency frameworks. Managing conflicts of interest is not about eliminating every possible overlap, it's about recognizing them early, handling them with transparency, and ensuring decisions are made objectively and in the best interest of the organization. That's why we are especially pleased to have directors, C-suite executive, aspiring board members, and senior management joining us today. Your leadership roles place you at the forefront of ethical decision-making, and discussions like this are vital in building cultures of integrity across all levels. With that overview, it's now time to hear from the expert himself. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Mr. Niels Wohlwend, Chief Compliance Officer at the Basel Institute on Governance. Mr. Niels will share his insights on strengthening compliance culture and advancing corporate integrity within organizations. Mr. Niels, over to you.
Good morning, good afternoon. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Just give me a thumbs up if you can hear me. Yes, all good. From a technical side, I see a hand that's raised. Does that mean it's all good? Yes. All right. So good afternoon, everyone. So first of all, I want to thank the Malaysian Institute of Management for the kind invitation to the Basel Institute, which I represent. As was mentioned, I'm the Chief Compliance Officer, lawyer by background, and spent the bulk of my career in compliance departments, mainly in the healthcare sector. Just to say a little bit something about myself in the past 20 years. I'm very happy to be here. I think I have a bit over an hour, if that's correct. In terms of the session, we have two parts. The first part is a presentation from my side. I think, as was mentioned in the chat, feel free to raise your hand or send any questions through the chat, where I'll be made aware of your question and we can discuss a bit more about what you wanna discuss. As a second part of the presentation, we have a couple case studies based on the first part, and I really encourage you to come forward and let everyone know what your thoughts are about the cases. Normally, when we run these sessions, the more active the participation, the more lively, I think, the bigger the benefit for everyone. So I really encourage everyone to come forward. There is normally no right or wrong answers. There's just a best practice or maybe a second best or third best practice. So just come forward and let us know your opinions. All right, let me try to share my screen here. Yes. I still see a hand or two raised. Just let me know if you want me to stop, huh? Otherwise, I'll go into full screen mode and start off with the presentation. All right, so conflicts of interest, obviously a very important topic in every institution, be it private or public institutions. And we've been dealing quite a bit with this topic at the Institute for the past years. So first slide, I just want to manage expectations. I've been working with different state-owned enterprises also in Asia to try to put the best conflict of interest policy together. And the attempt has frequently been to try to regulate all possible conflicts of interest. So managing expectations here, I just want to make clear it's not going to be possible to address all conflicts of interest in a policy. The policy should normally be a guiding document that will give a good guidance, high-level guidance, but it will never it will never achieve to regulate all possible situation that you could have in an organization. I'll just keep going, otherwise you stop me. I see a number of hands raised that sometimes pop up on my screen, so I'll just keep going unless someone stops me. All right, so content-wise, first part, we'll look a little bit at some of what we call the fundamentals of conflicts of interest, the basic concept and some key aspects of the framework. In a second part, we'll look at how to manage conflicts of interest, how to potentially avoid them, and what are important features such as identification, disclosure, and of course mitigation, before moving on to the third part, the case studies, where that will give me a little break as well, as we'll go through the question and the scenarios together. Then I'll give you a couple minutes, and we can then discuss the potential best management of the situation. All right, fundamentals, basic concept, obviously, as probably everyone is aware of, that always starts with somehow an organizational interest that you have a duty to fulfill as an employee that somehow overlaps with at least one private interest that you might have. We'll see throughout the presentation what that could be, but that is the basic idea when a conflict of interest normally pops up. Then a couple relevant buckets that we want to look at. First one is what we call personal life. So that's normally conflicts of roles, or what we call relationship conflicts. There again, we're going to dive a bit deeper into that in a couple slides. So first one based on your personal life, personal relationships. Second one based on value, on money. So monetary incentive, that's the first one. Financial conflicts, and also what we call non-financial conflicts. So that's normally items of value, so not cash or cash equivalents, but any other, like nice watches, nice gifts, presents that you might be given. So that could also constitute a conflict of interest on the value side. And then thirdly, the time element, which is more an HR related thing, but using your professional time for private business would also constitute a conflict of interest. However, this third one, we don't want to dive into. That's more on the HR side. So at least for my presentation, don't want to dive into that element today, but want to focus the presentation more on the first two, the personal life and the value situations. So key aspects of a COI framework is, of course, the definition, right? That's always an important element, and there is tons of definitions out there how you define conflicts of interest. So that is nevertheless the baseline of every solid framework, that you and your organization have a solid understanding what or how the conflict of interest is defined in your organization. I've just copy pasted here the definition of the European Commission for the sake of having a specific example. Then another one from the OECD, so a couple public organizations or international organizations, and then the third one from the Council of Europe. So I'm not going to read through these examples. When you go through them, what strikes us is that they basically all say the same, just with different words. And so you will hear me say that maybe a couple times throughout the presentation, that sometimes less is more, right? I mean, we normally are in complex environments already, and I think simplicity is really one of the key elements to make processes in organizations be more effective. So whenever we can be simplistic and regulate something in an easy way, try not to make it complicated. That's normally a good advice. That's also where we landed at the end with the state-owned enterprise that we supported in Indonesia, for that matter, that at the beginning had a conflict of interest policy that was roughly 100 pages long, that wasn't followed in their organization. It was simply too complex. Also, the way to report was way too complex. We ended up with a, I think, 15-page policy at the end for a complex organization that seems to work quite well these days, as we hear. So, as I mentioned, sometimes less is more, and if something can be said in an easy way, then simplicity is, from our perspective, really the way to go. All right, next one. Just wanted to, for the sake of showing one what we think is a good example, how conflict of interest can be defined. Obviously, the presentation will be shared after the session, so you don't need to take notes or pictures. You will receive the slides later on. So here, how many, I think, modern compliance programs regulate conflict of interest as a situation in which a person or organization has a conflicting interest, and serving one interest could have an adverse impact on other interests or responsibilities. So just an example of how we think an easy definition can be done, and capturing nevertheless a broad field of conflicts of interest situations. Then quickly want to look at the timeline. What is a conflict of interest? What's actually, the problem? So we'll go through the scenario here. So first of all, potential situation. Employee identifies a certain situation. He or she is unsure. Is it a conflict of interest? Yes or no? Just for the sake of making an example, we have the sister of a public official that is a department head and has applied for her brother's department. I mean, she's just an analyst that wants to join the department of her brother. So potentially it's an evaluation, whatever the situation is. If it's identified as not being a conflict of interest, you're obviously you're done. However, if it's confirmed to be a conflict of interest situation, in this scenario, the brother is indeed part of the hiring process, right? That would constitute an issue. And then if you manage the situation appropriately, the remediation measures are appropriate, you are done, right? You have identified a conflict of interest, but you have managed it appropriately, so that's not an issue. With that, I just want to say in the green field, conflicts of interest are normal and they appear everywhere in every organization. They are not the issue. The issue is if you don't handle them appropriately, right? So if you don't handle the conflict situation in an appropriate way, that might end up in an actual misconduct, right? Which is the actual issue, or abuse of office, abuse of power, name it what you want. But before you don't cross that line, you don't have an issue with a conflict of interest. So again, conflicts of interest, we have tons of conflicts of interest at the Institute because people just have a vast network, right? They know many people in other competing organizations, in governmental positions or in governments, etc. That's not an issue. That's even a sign for having people that are well connected, which is totally fine and is actually what we want to have. We just need to make sure that we handle these situations appropriately, and specifically that we handle them transparently, right? That everything is disclosed and documented in a fair and documented way. So that's I think what I want to say with this slide is conflicts of interest are absolutely okay and normal. The critical part is just they need to be addressed in a proper way, and everything needs to be documented. All right, so moving on to the conflict of interest framework. Apologies for that. We'll need to take a sip of my morning coffee from time to time. So 6 elements of the framework that we think are crucially important is, as I mentioned before, so establishing a clear policy, as clear as possible. That is really key. Then education and awareness building, obviously just having a policy, putting it in the shelf and not speaking about it, not running trainings, not running workshops, and not having tone from the top will not be very helpful ultimately. So education, awareness, what we're doing here, but obviously also within organizations is absolutely critical. Ensuring user-friendly access and to the materials and a simple reporting mechanism. Again, one, I think, of the most important elements of the framework, the user-friendliness, right? People have to understand, okay, I've identified a conflict, but what do I need to do about it? I don't know what to do about it. I think I'm fine, right? So that's a frequent reaction. If you make clear to your employees how to handle them, and how to report, even if they are unsure, that's what should be done. Then ensure appropriate resourcing. Obviously, the bigger the organization, the more resources are needed. That's why allocating the appropriate number of resourcing, be it in manpower or in systems, in technology, I think is also critical for the good functioning of the system. Then creating open dialogue and trust around the topic is really, really important. Obviously, many organizations have these so-called speak up cultures and organize events around them. I think what's really powerful is in relation to number two, the tone from the top. The more you will hear your leaders speak about that, about conflict of interest, or about just speaking up in general, the more likely the process and the compliance program overall is gonna be effective. And then finally, continuously monitor and audit the processes and cases. If you have an explosion of cases from one year to another, obviously you need to do a root cause analysis. What has happened? What's the reason for that? So just don't be blind on changes and on unexpected developments, and monitor a little bit the environment, what's going on, and just apply sound judgment what to do in certain situations. So we think these are really the 6 key elements of a good and robust framework. And just quickly want to dive a little bit deeper into number 2, 4, and 6 for that matter, and looking at what we can do there. Huh? So from an education and awareness building perspective, I think it's important to make sure employees are aware of their ethical responsibilities. Huh? The organization has normally a compliance program. There is an expectation for ethical behavior, and just I think making sure also in, for example, the onboarding training to employees how important the topic is to the organization. And letting them know you have a speak up culture. It's perfectly fine to come forward and speak up and look at the matter is really, really important. Code of conduct is a good first document to regulate also this topic in a high level, right? Many organizations have a more detailed maybe policies on that, conflict of interest, but the code of conduct is normally the first document that you throw at your employees, right? They look at that, it's an easy document to read, normally a couple pages, high level. I think we just think it's important to mention the topic there, and then maybe reference your conflict of interest policy, which is then going to provide some more details. Then tone from the top, repeated acknowledgement from top and middle management, super important, right? It's just not good enough to speak about it once and then not mention the topic for a couple of years again. I mean, people tend to forget. So the more frequently top or middle management can speak, even if it's just a sentence at the beginning of a sales meeting or whatever, and if you can have them do that, that would be, we think, very, very effective, and not just top management, but also middle management, as empiric studies have shown that normally employees are much closer to their direct line managers and really follow their example in many ways. Top management is sometimes far away, sitting in other countries for international organizations. It's good to have the tone from the top, but reinforcement from the middle is really important. All right, and ensuring appropriate resourcing, as we said, if ultimately down the line you're going to have you have an issue popping up, right? If an investigation starts, regulators or internal auditors, whatever, look into the issue. One of the most frequent problems that are identified are adequate resourcing, right? Be it that you have an outdated system, only half the cases are kept in there, or other systems have not been updated, etc. So making sure that for the size of your organization, and that's your own evaluation, that you have an adequate resourcing for conflicts of interest, we think is really important. Is also a great protection of your organization and senior leaders. So maybe take that as an argument when you speak about budgeting for the coming year and you need an additional headcount or some resources for that. I think that is normally a good argument. And then finally, monitoring, we look at the 3 lines of defense model there. The first line being the business that need to understand and report conflicts of interest. The second line would be the monitoring from the compliance department. So if you have that possibility, you have the resources to allocate an employee or part-time to the topic monitoring the conflict of interest space, that would be great. And even better if there is a third line of defense person from the audit or another independent risk function who evaluates, does audits after the fact, or once a year, once every other year, making sure that the system works well. That will also be a pretty powerful defense if you're in trouble down the line, and you can show that you're following these 3 lines of defense model. The business is being taught and understands the policy. There is good training going on. First line. Second line, the monitoring from the compliance department is being done. And third line, you also have an internal or external auditors coming in and making sure that the process is being reviewed from time to time. All right. Then looking at conflict of interest categories, I'm pretty sure you probably all heard about them. But nevertheless, I think it's important, as especially the third category is we've seen in a number of policies is being neglected, which we think is a mistake. We should have all 3 categories in there. So the actual conflicts of interest, right, which is a private interest that actually influences the performance of your duties as an employee. Then the potential conflict of interest is an interest that could result in a conflict based on likely future developments. We'll see on the next slide a couple examples. So just want to let you know on the next slides, I have a couple questions for you guys where I'll ask for your participation. So if you want to take a picture with your mobile phone of this screen, that might be helpful, huh? Just for the next slide. So potential one, so that's not an actual one, obviously, but it's based on prediction of future developments, huh? And then finally, the apparent one is actually not a conflict in reality, but it appears to be a conflict for a neutral outsider, right? For a person not being in the situation, not knowing the background and the details, for an independent person looking at the situation, it looks like it is a conflict of interest or could be a conflict of interest, but it actually is not one. That also is an issue because, as we know nowadays, perception is basically reality, right? So if you have a bad perception on an organization, even if the organization did not do anything wrong, nowadays with social media, the news travels so quickly that you're still going to have an issue down the road. All right, looking at some examples, and if you could turn on your mics, whoever wants to speak. I'd really love for whoever wants to, or put it in the chat as you like, and Farah can maybe help me with that. So example 1, an employee of a forestry state-owned enterprise in Indonesia, just an example we came across, is a board member on an NGO fighting deforestation. This could become a conflict of interest if the NGO were to file a complaint against the state-owned enterprise for environmental damages, for example. So based on the previous slide, what type of conflict of interest do you think that could be? Any idea from everyone? I know we have numerous people on the call that have a very good understanding of conflict of interest. I'm sure you have an idea what that could be. Do we have anything in the chat?
Potential, perceive, apparent, and conflict of interest.
So which one did we have a potential?
The most answered one is potential.
Okay, let me see. I'm just not able to move. Yes. Normally the majority is right, huh? So follow the majority is normally a good advice. Okay, second one, absolutely, that's a potential one, huh? Serving on the board of a company A while serving on the board of a competitor of company A, what would that be? Just shout out, just put it in the chat.
Majority answer actual.
And again, the majority is, of course, right. Then what about a company A hires a new employee who has the same name as the CEO, but they are not relatives?
The majority answer perceive.
Absolutely. I think you got the concept perfectly right. So we have now one of every category. And then the fourth example, purchasing goods or services from a supplier directly or indirectly owned by a relative of the head of procurement. What would that likely be? I mean, we could argue, we could dive a bit more into the case, but what is the first impression here? What do you think?
Majority answer actual, and some answer potential.
Yeah, it could be a potential. That's right. I mean, it looks like it's an actual because the head of procurement is very, very likely having an influence on the decision. But if he, for whatever reason, would not have it, you know, an influence, it would be a different scenario. An employee is a board member of companies A and B, which are not business related. This may create a conflict in the event that the two companies would anticipate doing business together. So what does that sound like?
Quite a mix. There are perceived, apparent, potential.
Yeah. Okay. Based on likely future events, so it looks like maybe the wording should have phrased it a bit differently, but the two companies are thinking of doing business together, so it's quite likely they will come together and do business together, so that would then be a potential one, huh? But of course, you know, people having voted for something else are right as well. It's the devil's in the detail, huh? It depends always on the individual situations. All right. So let me maybe stop here then just for a couple seconds and see if there are any questions to the kind of first part of the presentation, or do you want me to move on?
Mr. Niels, we do have two questions that we can address now from the floor.
Yeah.
So the first one, if the brother was not the department head, but just worked in the department, can the sister apply to work in the same department? Will this be considered as managed as the brother is not a decision maker?
Yeah, I think the relevant factor here is, first of all, the disclosure, right? It needs to be disclosed from the onset, and then the relative would normally need to recuse themselves. right? Completely step away and have zero influence on the process, and then that would normally be okay for the sister to apply for that position.
Okay, and the second question in regard to one of your slides, a few slides back, that talks about the framework for conflict of interest. Someone asked, can the HR be the monitoring department?
Sorry, can you repeat that? I didn't understand the last sentence.
Can the HR be the monitoring
Yeah.
department?
The HR. Sure. I mean, you can have a monitoring department. You mean monitoring would be second line, huh? Not third line. Is that right? Monitoring? Second line, huh? Yes? I think that's fine. I mean, monitoring can be done by whoever is responsible if conflict of interest is being given. And I'm working with my HR partner also at the Institute for Conflict of Interest, especially if it's HR related. It's just that not every conflict of interest is necessarily HR related, right? I mean, it tends to be. There is many HR related conflicts of interest because of personal relationships with others. And just the example we heard about hiring sisters and brothers and all that. But there is, of course, situations that have nothing to do with HR, right? So if nevertheless in your organization HR is responsible for conflict of interest, then I think it's fine that HR could be the monitoring department for conflicts of interest. That would be fine.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Niels. You can proceed.
Sure. All right. Okay, let's move to the second part and common types of conflicts of interest. Let me just look at time, how I'm doing. Yeah. All right, so following main categories, we heard about them before: conflict of roles, financial conflict, relationship, and non-financial. So diving right into the first category, so conflict of roles, we normally differentiate between three classical ones. So the long-term employment or long-term collaboration. So having a second job beside your first job, just for the sake of making an example, I have a main job and then my whatever sister has a little organization and I'm helping out there for 10% on, I don't know, financial. I'm a financial analyst. I'm helping with the accounting. So I'm having a second job. So that could potentially constitute a conflict of interest. So that would be a long-term engagement outside of your main engagement. And short-term would be this, you're speaking at a conference, you're being paid for that. That's just a short-term or one-off engagement outside of your organization. And then normally on higher level roles, like your CEO has also a board other mandate in another organization or is part of an advisory committee, etc. So these are all situations that would raise certain concerns. Again, it's not that this cannot happen. It just needs to be looked at and be handled appropriately. And then just special scenario number 4 or D is what is called a revolving door or cooling off period. That's the situation when as mentioned here, public official abandoning public service, having a lot of influence in his maybe as part of his public function, going into private sector and then utilizing all his relationships that he has built in the public sector to basically give an illicit advantage to the private organization he has joined. So this specific situation also normally needs to be regulated when you have the change from public to private or also from private to public to a certain extent. All right, then financial conflicts, I think quite classical, right? I've some shares, I have some interest in a certain company. I've created a company with my sister again, and then she's bidding for a contract in my organization. So these would be financial interest. Normally, in jurisdictions, you have what is called a corporate governance framework of 5 to 10% voting share ownership, which is constitutes constitutes an issue. Obviously, it can be below that. You could say it's higher than that, but frequently organizations go with a 5 to 10% where it starts to be an issue. So if I have a share from a worldwide company, from Apple, for example, right? I mean, that's normally not an issue. I don't have any influence on Apple. That's way too big. Just because I have a share there, that's not an issue. But if you have like a certain voting power in an organization that is applying and doing business in with your main company, that could be an issue. Then insider trading, obviously, if you have an information advantage, you know certain things, and then you pass that information on to your, again, the example, your sister, where you also have shares in the company, and then your sister's company has an advantage, gets the contract, and of course that also brings money to your pocket. That would also constitute an issue. Then relationship conflicts, here we differentiate between relationship within the same organization. So that's the example we had before. My sister applying for my department, so that's in my organization. So there's certain rules where you need to recuse or at least make sure you don't participate. You can also normally not be in a supervisory function. So I shouldn't be the boss of my sister, my wife, my cousin, whatever. But also for family ties in other organizations, right? If I'm the head of marketing of pharma company A and my wife is the whatever marketing head of pharma company B, and we compete, then obviously that could constitute an issue as well, as we could discuss, you know, our marketing practices and divide markets and whatnot. So these are all situations that need to be disclosed. It could well be that it's not an issue because we are not active in the same field. I'm a compliance person. My wife is a salesperson in another organization, right? That does not necessarily have any relevance, but it could be. So there again, a closer look, a closer analysis is relevant there, and making sure everything is disclosed and documented appropriately is really important for these conflict of interest situations. Then non-financial conflicts we see here, we speak about gift, meals, travel, entertainment, and other favors. So the general rule is in many organizations, of course, gift giving and meals, hospitality, inviting business partners can be seen as okay, as appropriate under certain circumstances when business is being discussed. So that's a general rule. However, from a conflict of interest perspective, there are certain scenarios that must be avoided or must be looked at. And what would constitute an issue would be, first of all, when a gift is being solicited, right? If the person is saying, I'm okay to do that business with you, but I want a gift for that, or I want something in return, even if it's being said in an indirect manner, right? It's normally not going to be that open. That would be an issue. And what should never be accepted are gifts above a certain value, right? So sometimes gifts can be okay if it's, you know, culturally it's part of the culture, if these gifts are of limited value, right, or modest gifts, as is mentioned in most industry codes. That's normally a couple euros or couple dollars, but it's of course not okay to receive an expensive watch or things like that in return for business or for other business reasons. That's never acceptable. So whatever the exact value is, dependent on industry. I'm coming from pharma industry. In pharma industry, it was so common to give gifts to doctors, right, to kind of thank them for prescriptions. That was such a big issue from a corruption perspective that in Europe, at least, the pharma industry has decided to stop gifts altogether. So zero gift. Here the limit is zero. You cannot give a doctor a gift for $1 or €1 anymore, according to the European Trade Association. But it's different in other industries and also in other parts of the world. So just make sure it's appropriate in comparison with the in line with the custom that you have in your country. Then free personal services that we see sometimes, so that's an illicit advantage. That's also not okay, right? So you have someone, I don't know, repairing your car for free or cleaning your house or whatever it is. We've seen many examples also in some parts of Asia where this happened. So that would not be okay and certainly constitute a conflict of interest. Cash or cash equivalent should be avoided as well. So it's never a good idea to give cash as a gift. So that's normally prohibited in all codes, in all compliance programs I've seen, and also cash equivalents. So that's, I don't know, expensive tickets for a football game or for a baseball game or whatever is the national sport in your country. So giving these vouchers that you can utilize would constitute cash equivalents, and that would normally be unacceptable. All right, then again, just stopping for a couple seconds to see if there are any questions before moving on to the managing part.
Okay, hi again, Mr. Niels. We do have a couple of questions here.
Okay.
The first one, I believe that this is referring to one of your slides, which is the third one, relationship conflicts. One person is asking, closely related here refers to blood related.
Sorry, can you repeat the last sentence?
Closely related here refers to blood related, meaning that
Yeah,
they are perhaps siblings or in the same family.
yeah. And what's the question then?
Yeah, they are asking for clarification what closely related person here means.
That's a good question. You know what? Can I park that because that's part of one of my case scenarios of my case studies where we are going to come to this discussion. So if it's okay, I'd like to park that one, and I promise we'll come back to that when we go to the case scenario.
Okay, so there
Okay.
is another
Thank you.
one. Can husband and wife together sit on board?
On the same board, you mean, or it's on the same board?
Yes, correct.
Yeah, I mean, it depends. Yeah, it depends on the scenario, but I think that's fine, right? It cannot be that is not an exclusion factor. If the husband is the CEO and the wife is I don't know, the CFO, for example, of an organization, they are experts in different disciplines, and then they sit be it in the board of this organization or another organization. um, Per se, I don't see an issue with that, right? It only starts to be an issue if you are compromising on the obligations towards your main employer, right? So I think we probably would need a scenario where we have a bit more detail to see if everything's okay, but it's per se not an issue if everyone is fulfilling his duties towards his employer.
Okay, and can we take one more question?
Sure.
So many MNCs have a global code of ethics where, as you mentioned, global gifts are not permitted. Can such codes of ethics be made flexible according to specific country accepted practices?
Yes, they can. I mean, I think the question is the so-called risk appetite of an organization, right? I mean, I think it has multiple factors. It depends what industry are you in. Some industries are more strict than others, and then it depends on the country also in which you are. What is a normal practice of gift giving, and so the combination of these two factors then needs to be blended or needs to be added with the risk appetite, right? Do you want to have a high risk policy where you say, okay, we go to the absolute maximum of what is potentially permissible? Maybe you look at local jurisdictions. In Europe, we do have a number of cases, so law cases that have been decided by courts. So we know exactly what is, for example, permissible in pharma industry in Germany, where we have a €5 limit. If you go 6, 7, €8, you know you are at risk. You can do that as an organization if you have a higher risk appetite. Frequently, if you are a bigger organization and what is more important to you is reputation, you don't want to risk that. So you have a more, I would say, conservative policy. And you say, okay, I don't want that risk, 6, 7, 8, 10, €20 just for the sake of being able to give a more expensive gift. So I want a policy that is absolutely 100% in line with local law and what courts have said is local law. Then you adhere to these limits. But it's I think everything's possible. It's just a question, how big is your risk appetite?
Thank you so much,
Okay,
Mr. We do have
sure,
more, but we will save it for our segment later on.
absolutely. All right, so going into the second part, let me just see again how much time we have. I just want to make sure. Maybe I'm going to go a bit quicker through that section, section, just to make sure we have enough time for the case scenarios, huh? So managing conflict of interest, I think, is really a pass, right? How you handle that, and we just want to go through the different elements. So the first one is the identification. As we said, what's super important there is this solid notion of what is a conflict of interest, make the definition clear also for your employees, and train them accordingly to make sure they identify when a situation might constitute a conflict. Then, if possible, employees should avoid conflicts of interest, right? We'll see a bit later also what that means, but there is possibilities, like a gift. If you reject the gift, right, you say, I'm sorry, I cannot accept this gift because my company policy only allows up to $10. Now this gift is $20. I'm not accepting it. Then you avoid the conflict situation. Obviously, your sister is your sister. There you cannot avoid that. So there is situations where conflicts can be avoided. If, however, that's not possible, then make sure employees understand, disclose. And here, really, the mantra should be disclose, disclose, disclose. Even if it's not an issue down the line, things should be disclosed to make sure we are really transparent and show good faith as an organization. Once disclosed, as we've seen, the conflict should be identified. What kind of conflict is it? Which category is it? And then appropriate mitigation measures should be taken. We see a couple here. I'll go through them. The classical one we see here. We'll see them also in the coming slides. So key aspects of identification, again, robust training. Frequently, what's a good help here is to appoint a go-to person, right? I'm a bit unsure. Is it a conflict? Is it not a conflict? Oh, I know, I have a central person I can go to, the compliance officer, maybe the HR manager, whoever. Just make it clear who that person is so that people can go to that person and discuss before they formally file or formally report the conflict, huh? If it's a potential conflict. Then distinction here, there is personal conflicts of interest that are in relation to myself as an individual, but there could also be organizational conflicts of interest, right? Two organizations somehow working together and trying to influence one and each other and the other's policies. So that could constitute organizational conflict. So one of the first things to do when such a situation is identified is to classify, is it basically related to an individual or to an organizational conflict? So why must we try to avoid it? We said that a bit before. So employees have an obligation of loyalty, and sometimes there is easy ways to avoid such conflicts by simply rejecting, a gift or a certain item to make sure that the conflict doesn't actually materialize. What I also want to say is having a too strict policy, we've seen that as well, might be a disadvantage. So it's really important to strike a balance there, having a policy on conflict of interest that makes sense. right? Obviously every one of us is a personal individual and has personal interests, personal rights. So you don't want to, as an organization, basically disrespect these rights. So if a policy is too strict, I think it can backfire. It could be unworkable in practice. It's just impossible to implement, which would be really counterproductive and may even deter people from joining your organization if it's known, oh, this organization has a super strict conflict of interest policy. You're not allowed to do anything on private investments, everything is prohibited. That might be going too far. So just think about what is the right balance for your conflict of interest policy there, huh? Yeah, as we said here, what we think will also make sense is to identify early on common or frequent risks in industries or for your organization. If you know in your organization you have a certain field which is a high risk for conflict of interest, make sure it's regulated in the policy. As I said on the first slide, you will likely not be able to regulate all possible conflicts, but if you have identified through monitoring areas that are frequently subject to conflict of interest, then make simply sure to regulate them so that employees know, black and white. I can do this, but I'm not allowed to do that, and that will also bring down the number, hopefully, of conflict of interest reporting, which is ultimately, the intention. Then disclosing conflicts of interest, two types normally there that we see is the regular disclosure. That's the annual, once a year, employees normally need to disclose, also when they join the organization. And then the ad hoc ones, right? It's not good enough to have just a regular one. If I disclose on the 1st of January, I don't have a conflict of interest. And then on the 2nd or 3rd of January, my situation changes because I'm getting married with someone or whatever that is in another organization, and then I should have disclosed. It's just not good enough to wait another 360 days or so to disclose. So making sure that employees understand their obligation to come forward and disclose whenever something changes in their personal life, right? In personal situation that is relevant for the organization, then that would need to be disclosed. Normally, there is timelines between 30 and 90 days that are being given for reporting such instances. Huh? Then also based on disclosure requirements for higher level management like board and executives, if it's known they sit on various boards and in competing organizations and advisory boards and whatnot, that just needs to be made transparent in the file, right? Not necessarily for every employee, but just in the conflict of interest file, making sure the organization is capturing that. Then just quickly going through that mitigation. So from the reviewer perspective, make sure that the evaluation of conflict situations is fair, right? And every employee is treated the same, whether it's a vice president or just a baseline employee, and pragmatic and informed decisions are being taken, right? Based on the facts, making sure also not to over-regulate the whole thing, and communicate back to the employees why a certain decision was taken. We found that a pretty powerful tool to make sure that the organization does not feel that decisions are just being taken randomly. There is no policy, no fairness. So make sure you communicate back on the decisions and obviously retain documentation. Specific measures, just going very quickly because we're getting a bit late on time, is the classical measure: stepping back, recusal from a situation where obviously brother should not be involved in hiring of sister situation. Refusal, as I mentioned before, refusing a personal gift will quickly solve the situation. Reassignment, you're getting another department. I'm from changing from compliance department to legal department or whatever. So my brother that is also working in the compliance department, that's not an issue anymore. Putting safeguards in place, a third party overlooking the situation, an independent third party, or other remedial measures. From a consequence perspective, obviously, legal liability could be an issue, so there could be a case filed against the organization. But normally what weighs more there and is more important is the reputational harm that can bring to organizations. In line with that, we have the loss of credibility and trust, partners not wanting to work with your organization anymore. So these are all situations we have seen and that have been have been spoken about a lot in social media and on other platforms, scandals, but also financial loss. Ultimately, you're losing business because others other companies do not want to do business with your organization anymore based on scandals that broke. So all potential consequences. All right, so moving on to the third part, I've planned for 3 case studies if we have time. If we don't have time, we'll do what we can. But I'm still very positive that we will have some time to do that, going through the 3 scenarios. So first scenario here, and maybe at the end of the slide, I will ask you maybe to take a picture or so you have the scenario on your screen, on your mobile phone. So here we have a procurement officer is overseeing a bid for a major IT system. One of the subcontractors on a shortlisted bid is run by her cousin's husband, Ahmad. They don't speak often, but the relationship exists. Huh? So the situation, the procurement officer and the cousin obviously have a certain have certain family ties, but they are not very close. They didn't Zahia didn't realize that Ahmad was involved until late in the process, so that's a real fact. She didn't know he was involved. She just learned pretty late in the process. And also Zahira is not making the final decision. She is just part of the process. She can be asked. So has a potential influence. So you see, it's a gray zone a bit situation, obviously to make it a bit more complex. The questions here would be the following. Does the procurement officer Zahira need to disclose? So please take a picture of that slides before we can move to the next slide. For the questions, maybe if you just make some notes for yourself and we'll discuss it then in a couple of minutes. Huh? So questions, does she need to recuse? Does she need to do anything? She learned relatively late in the process about this. Then does she need to recuse herself from the project or take another action? Huh? So here we come to the question that was that came in before on the family ties and what is too close. So here they are not necessarily very close, but nevertheless there is a relationship that exists. So is that okay? And then does it change that the mistake was an honest one? So Zahira indeed did not know that Ahmad was part of the process. What does that matter at all? And how can such gray zone situations be effectively addressed, do you think, in your conflict of interest framework? Do you have ways to prevent that? So these are the 4 questions. I plan for 5 minutes. I don't know if you need them or need more time, but if you have, if you want to take a couple minutes just to think about these questions, and then I'm very happy to enter into a discussion about the right course of action here. Again, there is no right or wrong. There is just probably best, best practice and second best. All right. So I'll leave it to you for maybe 2-3 minutes. Let me know if you have any questions. Just feel free to speak up, to turn on your camera if you feel like it, so we can see each other, or put the question in the chat as you like. Yeah, let's see some comments in the chat. Huh?
Here are some answers from the chat box. Participants are saying that first one, cousin is a far stretch in terms of family relationships. And others say that yes, it should be disclosed at the beginning. And yes, and as soon as she found out in regard to question 1.
All right.
And then for question 2,
Hold on. Let's just go to the answer then for question 1, huh?
all right, sure.
Before going to number 2. Oh, sorry, I'm just moving that forward. Okay, so that's absolutely right. She should disclose the relationship, obviously, as soon as she becomes aware, right? She cannot disclose from the beginning because she wasn't aware at the beginning. But as soon as she is aware or she becomes aware, she should disclose the situation, making sure that everyone is aware. Okay, then second question, yes. What are potential answers here?
For the second question,
Mm-hmm.
participants say yes, and she needs to recuse herself if she is asked to evaluate.
Yes,
And there
absolutely.
are also some that say that she does not need to recuse herself.
Yeah, no, she would need to recuse herself, would certainly be a best practice. As we say, I mean, perception is reality. I think that just needs to be considered in today's world. If something looks fishy or looks bad, it should be managed somehow. So clearly the recommendation here would be to recuse Zahira. Then third question.
Yes, but for the question 2, right? But what about if it's there's no other staff available to continue with the project? Let's say other than Zahira, there's no other staff that can continue to evaluate it.
And let's go to the situation, huh? So she's overseeing the IT bid, and it simply needs to be disclosed, right? I mean, if she, which would be a fairly unlikely situation normally, right? In a major, for a major IT project, you would at least have 2 or more managers, IT managers. So if she's the only one, then that's the case. She nevertheless needs to, it needs to be disclosed. And I think it probably would be a fair approach to have a third party as an independent function be it in the organization or outside the organization, making sure that at least the process went in a fair way, that she did not, excuse me, that she did not give an advantage to her cousin somehow, right? Who is bidding for the contract. So at least that the more classical approach would be to simply recuse herself, and someone else in the IT department would take on the bid and the project. But if not possible, an independent third party should at least ensure that the process went fairly. Okay.
And then for question number 3, one person said that it is an honest mistake. Then this need to report, document, and implement remedial measures, but there's no need for punishment if proven unintentional. Another person said that intent affects accountability, but not the need for corrective action.
Yes, absolutely. So I think the intent matters for the evaluation of consequences. Huh? That is what's relevant. I think that's what one of the answers is mentioning as well. Huh? So it matters for consequences, if consequences need to be taken, but it does not change the situation. Huh? The conflict situation remains the same. So Zahir needs to disclose as soon as she becomes aware. She needs to recuse in the classical situation. But obviously, for the consequence management, if she acts in a fair way, and she discloses, then obviously the mistake is an honest one. She will not be punished for that. Huh? She did what she was aware of, and she took the right actions. That's fine. If she tried to cover it up, that would matter for potential consequences. But the situation, the conflicting situation, doesn't change because of the intention. Huh? All right, then question number 4. Any ideas on the on the policy side, how could we address such situations upfront?
One person
Any?
to promote
Mhm.
a culture of integrity and transparency, encouraging early disclosure and discussion rather than concealment. Another person said to have clear conflict of interest policy, regular training, declaration mechanism, independent oversight, and consultation with legal or compliance before decision is made.
Yeah, very good. I think I heard absolutely the right thing. So clarity, clarify policies. So making sure that you, for example, standardize conflict of interest family trees. You know, you're clearly mentioning in your policy until second level or first, second level, um, um, relatives are considered too close. So then you would automatically need to close if it's what we call third level. So it's cousins or even further away relatives, you do not need to disclose. So whatever the rule is in the organization, it can be clarified through policies if that's what you want to do. My personal opinion is that I think we're still gonna not gonna capture all situations because then you start to also move into friendship situations. You know, what is a close friend or too close friend situation. So I think robust training of making sure employees disclose and then the individual situation is discussed with an expert, compliance officer, or another expert in the organization are normally more effective, but setting at least some minimal boundaries, I think is a good thing too. So speaking about family ties, is what frequently is done in policies. As soon as we speak about family and someone qualifies as family, maybe you define what family means, then people should come forward. So again, there's two ways: trying to regulate it super precisely or relatively high level, and then making sure that you have a go-to person, compliance officer, legal, HR, that can help clarify specific situations, should help to avoid such cases. Then again, robust training and ongoing monitoring would be good ideas here as well. And of course, as was said, fostering speak up culture, making sure integrity is being strengthened. That's obviously super important, as always. All right, second case. So that was the easy one. Huh? It's getting quite a bit more complex now. Second scenario, we have global pharma company, GPA, regional subsidiary of a multinational, is preparing to launch a new product, potentially blockbuster, so an important product for Southeast Asia. The local team is tasked with selecting a distributor, so quite important job worth roughly 10 million US dollar annually. So really lucrative deal here. And then we have characters, Mr. Chong. Again, take a picture of that slide if you want. Procurement director, having good relationships in the industry. And Ms. Lee, senior operations manager, responsible for evaluating vendors, and Mr. Kumar, head of business development in Asia. And then here comes the situation during the process. One of the top contenders, which is Asia Logistics, that has consistently ranked well. During a dinner, Mr. Kumar learned through casual conversations that the owner of this Asia Logistics is Mr. Chong's brother-in-law. So again, Mr. Chong, just quickly going back, that's the regional procurement director who is well connected. So that's his brother-in-law. Mrs. Lee was not involved in discussion, but could hear what was being said. So she was just sitting at the table. She just overheard the conversation. Mr. Kumar was unsure whether the process had been carried out correctly. He confronted Mr. Chong, who insisted that he had disclosed the relationship a long time ago to his manager. Family ties are common in Asia anyways and do not necessarily influence business decisions, which is probably a fair point. Then Asia Logistics is most competitive vendor, excluding them would be probably unfair. So complicating factors here a little bit, Asia is indeed among the most competitive, submissions. So they have a good proposal. Concerned employees feel uncomfortable raising objections, fearing potentially, you know, being disrespectful or maybe even retaliation. If the relationship become public, media and regulators could view it as favoritism or corruption, damaging the company's reputation. What should be done here? Huh? So questions, what is the most appropriate course of action? What should be done? How should the company handle the evaluation of Asia logistics while maintaining fairness and transparency? So weighing a little bit between, I mean, it's risk appetite, right? I mean, what should I do? Do I go for zero risk, or how can I move forward with the business? It's a good bid, but how can I minimize the risk here? What safeguards should be put in place to prevent both actual and perceived conflicts? Should Mrs. Lee, who just overheard the conversation, what should she do basically, huh? Okay, so these are the questions. Maybe we take a bit less than 10 minutes, huh? Otherwise, we'll be at the end, but just if you want to again start putting things in the chat, I'll leave the questions here. What do you think is the best course of action?
Mr.
Was
Niels,
it? Yeah.
can go back to the situation to take a picture.
So do you want me to go back?
Yeah, to the situation. Yep.
Yeah. So please take a picture. So you can read again through the case. You want me to go one more back, or is that one okay? Okay, looks like it's okay, huh? Then again, the questions. So most appropriate course of action. Let me know once you have the first responses, and then we can go through the answers that I have. Go back once more, go in one more here, huh? Again, Mr. Chong, procurement director, Mrs. Lee, just evaluating performance of the submissions, and Mr. Kumar, head of business development. Huh? Can we go to the first?
Yep, we do have
answer?
some answers coming in already.
Mm-hmm.
So for the first question, someone answered that pause the current vendor evaluation for Asia Logistics and conduct an independent review of the procurement process to ensure that it has been handled objectively and in line with company policy. And another person answered that Mr. Chong should excuse himself from the selection process, and for the future decision making, he should not be involved when it comes to AL, as it cannot be established if he can remain impartial since AL is owned by his brother-in-law.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. Again, I mean, that's frequently, you know, the steps to take. Even though Mr. Chong claims he can be impartial, the family connection creates both an actual conflict of interest and a perceived one anyways. So the best course of action would be to make sure that he recuses himself from that situation. Oh, sorry. Then he can still provide input on technical aspects, but should not have voting decision rights. So that's a possibility if he's the expert in the field, right? Having pure technical feedback, maybe, you know, also passing on the bids to him, but not telling him which company or which organization they're coming from. So he just looks at the technical aspects and provides his expert feedback, and then others take the decision based also on his feedback, for example, right? how should the company handle the evaluation of Asia logistics while maintaining fairness? So how do we deal with that situation?
Kamalul Faizin answered to assign an independent evaluation panel, excluding Mr. Chong, conduct a re-evaluation of all vendor proposals using clear documented criteria, and then keep an audit trail of all decisions and communicate internally that the review aims to protect integrity, not punish individuals.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
another person answered that the evaluation should be conducted by a neutral team without personal ties to any bidder.
Yeah. Yeah, I think all good, all very good proposals. So again, we think there is ways that obviously they should, Asia logistics should not automatically be excluded. That would be, or could be considered unjustified discrimination, but must be conducted by an independent panel. So that's exactly what, the people that you read the answers out loud, said. So well done. That's absolutely what should happen. The process should be well documented. I think that was said as well. It's always super important to document what you're doing. Many organizations have the right ideas and the right approach, but it's not well documented. So I would say, follow the motto that we have in compliance. The overall global motto is one that actually is coming from the US FDA, Food and Drug Administration, which says if it's not documented, it did not happen. Right? That's the assumption. If something's not documented, later on, a judge could claim you never did it, right? Even if you actually did it. So all these good ideas that you have with the independent panel and all that, make sure everything is well documented when you take these decisions and these actions. Huh? And then record Mr. Chong's conflict, disclosure, and his family ties, whatever that he has recused from the final decision, that should all be again documented. Huh? Okay, what safeguards should be put in place to prevent both actual and perceived conflicts? Any ideas there?
One person answered, GPA needs to implement robust formal policies to manage conflicts of interest, institute a clear mandatory COI policy that requires all employees, especially in management and procurement, to formally disclose any potential, perceived or actual conflicts in writing on an annual basis and as they arise for new projects.
Yeah,
And
very good.
someone also answered, require annual and ad hoc COI declarations for all staff involved in procurement, ensure regular training, create a confidential reporting channel for staff to raise COI concerns safely.
Yes, perfect. Very good answers. Absolutely. Mandatory written disclosure. I mean, that is super important, that really needs to be done and needs to be required also from a policy perspective. So really, really important. Then the independent oversight, as we said, and training on cultural sensitiveness, right? Making sure that family ties, everyone accepts, understands they exist, maybe in certain industries even more so. That's perfectly fine, but corporate rules need to be followed when it comes to procurement and other processes, and conflict of interest need to be disclosed there. Huh? So super important. All right. Then reinforce also the possibility for anonymous reporting if possible. Or if necessary. So what should Mrs. Lee do, right? She has overheard the conversation, is a bit unsure about how the situation was handled. So as a good corporate citizen, what should she do as a good employee? She's unsure if the situation was handled appropriately. What do folks think? What would be the right course of action?
Someone answered that Ms. Lee should absolutely do something. Her silence could be interpreted as complicity and puts the company at risk. As a senior operations manager responsible for evaluating vendor performance, a buyer selection process directly undermines her role.
Yeah, absolutely. So she's unsure. So she could obviously confront the person directly and go and ask, hey, has something been done about it? But again, it's important to give employees different options, right? If for whatever reason she feels uncomfortable, maybe because of potentially fearing retaliation, etc., she should potentially go to her manager if that was an acceptable way for her. Otherwise, HR compliance could be other points that she could go to. And finally, the ultimate possibility should always be the anonymous reporting possibility. So that should always be a possibility, but it should also be a last resort, right? That's not what employees should typically be doing at the very beginning. Okay, so case study 3, we have 1 minute. I'm not sure if we can go a couple minutes above or we need to stop here. Just
Yeah, we'll
let me
have
know.
to cut off over here and move with the Q&A segment, if that's okay with you, Mr. Niels.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you very much. Okay, I'll start sharing my screen now. Okay, hi again, everyone. I hope you guys are all still with us. And of course, thank you so much, Mr. Niels, for the insightful and thought-provoking presentation. So now we will proceed to the Q&A segment, where we can explore some of the key points raised and address any specific queries from our audience. So if you still have any questions that you would like to ask, please type them into the chat box. And these questions will surely help other participants to gain more insights. And to guide us through this discussion, we are pleased to have Dr. Gita, who will serve as our moderator for the session. Dr. Gita is one of our lead facilitators for the diploma program, a chartered accountant and chartered management accountant. And with over 24 years of international corporate experience across Europe, the Middle East, and Asia, she is an expert in governance, sustainability, forensic accounting, cybercrime, and fraud risk assessment. And with that, I'll now hand it over to Dr. Gita to moderate the Q&A session.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Ms. Farah. Mr. Niels, thank you very much. That was an excellent presentation, and I'm sure everyone enjoyed that. So I'm going to sum up some of the questions because it's like, everybody's so excited. There's so many different angles, and, obviously conflict of interest becomes, a day-to-day challenge that most of us are actually facing. So one of the things that I can see inside the chat that we all seem to be looking at is the movement or the development as we go along. We have seen some interesting cases, and like some of the participants have also mentioned about the recent ever famous astronomer case as well. We are also seeing a lot of personal relationships actually developing as well in organizations because people are spending so much of time in the offices. So I'm going to combine a couple of questions. What most people want to know is like, when you're having these kind of relationships in the organization, secretive or otherwise, how does that work? What are the kind of policies that we should take, and what are the kind of positions that we should take as well? Because, does this impact if either one of the parties want to take a legal action against each other or something like that? What would be your thought, Mr. Niels? Mr. Niels, are you there?
Mr. Niels, you are muted.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, sorry, I had some technical problems. Couldn't hear you.
Okay.
Could you repeat? Yeah, I just couldn't hear you. Just back.
All right, no worries. So I was saying earlier that some of the participants were actually looking at scenarios in the aftermath of the astronomer circumstances. So they've asked that in the sense that if there are personal relationships being developed in the organization, it could be both secretive or none. It could be disclosed as well. Would that actually impact any particular, legal actions or perspectives or policies going forward? What would be your thoughts on that? Is there any win-win situations that they could possibly look at?
Yeah, you mean in relation with the ties that would exist to external people?
It could be external, or it could be both husband and wife are within the organization, but maybe different departments or similar departments. So what they're trying to say is that you're having personal relationships. In some cases, it can be, a direct conflict, obviously, especially if both have authorities on a similar matter. But in some cases, maybe not. So they're just asking for guidance, especially in those areas.
Yeah. So very good question. I mean, I think as I said throughout my presentation, what's always key is first of all to understand that there might potentially be an issue and to disclose, and then take it on with an expert, right? Making sure that you get the right expert advice and input. And then it's highly dependent on the individual situation, on the individual case. I think, I mean, many situations, even if you have family ties, that could be absolutely okay if it's handled appropriately, right? If it's overseen by an independent third party, and I think the difficulty here is to make sure that you only apply measures that are the minimal invasive, if I might say so, right? So the minimum that is needed to handle the situation appropriately, right? We're trying to make sure with our conflict of interest rules and regulations not to overregulate and prohibit situations that are potentially, looking like a conflict, but in reality, they are not a conflict. Therefore, I think it's really highly dependent on the individual situation. It's very difficult to say, let's handle all these cases, with one regulation and in always the same way. So making sure you get an expert advice on the specific case would be my recommendation, and appointing a person, normally a compliance officer or similar person, to oversee the situation and then document everything would be my take on that.
Thank you very much. Just to add on, there's also another perspective that is also, very interesting. One would be in terms of the public-private partnership. So one of the circumstances that they've given here is where there's a transfer of patients from the public sector hospitals to private sectors. And in some of the cases, the government doctors are actually working in this private clinics as well, or the private hospitals itself. So how would you actually view this in terms of being a conflict of interest or a potential conflict of interest, and what could actually be put into place here in terms of the policies and guidances?
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective here in Europe, I don't know if it's different on your side of the globe, but here we simply follow the classical data privacy regulations that we have. In Europe, that would be GDPR. They would be similarly applicable to public and private institutions. So it's really one standard for all. I think that's a sensitive matter. No matter if you're a private or a public institution, patient data and patient information needs to be handled with extreme sensitivity. And for me, I don't see a relevant difference whether it's a public or private institution. I think the same high standards need to be applied in both worlds.
Thank you. Agreed on that, but having said that, there's a lot of these cases going around, and it's pretty scary, to be honest, because this can be a huge, impact, especially in terms of patients' health and things like that. But anyway, moving forward as well in terms of the policies. Now, I like the way that, when you first started off, you said, when you were talking about the definitions, you said sometimes less is better. What, in terms of like things like the revolving door or cooling off periods in terms of contracts and all that, what would be your thoughts in terms of an acceptable time period, give and take?
Yeah, again, I mean, I think that's a difficult question. What we see in many countries is that we have this 12 months time period, which I think is a good, I would say middle way, is a good average. But again, I think here again, the individual case, the individual situation matters, right? If you are the secretary general of a big international organization and you've been there for many years, maybe a cooling off period of 1 year is not sufficient. And if you're a public official in a lower rank, maybe 6 months could be sufficient, right? So I think it's again here an attempt to find a middle way. Again, I think the 12 months makes sense as an average, as a middle way, but here again, looking at the individual case, at the individual situation, also looking at who's going from where to where matters and will always be taken into consideration, I think.
Thank you so much. Just a couple of questions more, before we wrap up. I think so. One of it that's actually come up as well comes back towards in the sense that if there is actually a dispute in terms of the, conflict of interest, and would you recommend that they actually have like some sort of a committee, or who should actually be the key people behind the decisions when it comes to its clarifying the subjectivity behind the COI?
Yeah. So what we've seen there, I mean, classically the first go-to person or department is compliance. So classically, that's what happens. If the situation cannot be solved, because normally what happens is compliance is advising, right? They are frequently not taking the ultimate decision, but they are advising the business. If the business disagrees with a recommendation, let's say, from the chief compliance officer, then what we see, and I think that's probably a good solution, is that you go to the audit committee of the board. Normally the audit committee, or frequently the audit committee, is overseeing the compliance program, is having strategic guidance that they give, but they also act as an independent review body to take decisions in difficult cases. So I think in that it'd be an acceptable way to treat it, to give it to these normally very senior people, right, who've served on boards and on leadership teams for many, many years, sometimes decades. It's normally a good mix of people that has a robust understanding of risk and risk environments. So giving the ultimate decision to this group, or whatever the group is called in your organization, right? It could be called differently, but it's the overseeing body of the compliance program. So frequently the audit committee. I think that's frequently a good solution.
Thank you. There's a lot of diversity in the way that we can actually approach this, across countries, across different industries, or even different types of organizations. Like, say, for example, even if you look at a family-owned business, what they would consider as conflicts of interest would be slightly different. How would you actually maybe consider these kind of I would say varieties, and what would be a best practice? Like, I mean, in some countries, it's a big no-no towards any sort of gift across any sort of value. And in some places, they tell you, okay, well, use your common sense. If you think it's going to be leading to something, then, stay away from it. How would what would be your best advice to keep it simple in these kind of circumstances?
I think for me the best approach is to make sure that you tailor it to your specific needs, right? I think it's not just valid for the conflict of interest situation, but for compliance programs in general. Successful compliance programs have always been tailored to the specific needs of an organization. And as you correctly point out, Dr. Gita, is that every organization has a different approach to things, and has maybe also a different risk appetite. The risk environment might be different. So I think making sure that these elements are taken into consideration when drafting your conflict of interest policy, I think ultimately for me is the right approach. I'm not sure it's going to help simplicity necessarily, but if you are overseeing a big organization, you look what your peers do. Maybe you have a trade association, then you discuss it there. I think that's helping for simplicity, and hopefully you can push this common approach that you've taken with competitors in the trade association, so that everyone adheres to this common approach, but again tailoring it to your industry and to the specific risk level of your organization, I think is important.
Thank you very much, Mr. Niels. I wish we could go on. There's so many questions, and it was really a wonderful presentation from you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
But unfortunately, looking at the time factor, I think I will pass it back to Ms. Farah. Thank you very much once again.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Niels and also Dr. Gita. Of course, I'm also very sad that we have to cut short today's presentation and also the Q&A session due to time interest. So as we approach the end of today's webinar, we'd like to express our sincere appreciation to all participants for joining us, and of course to our speaker, Mr. Niels, for sharing such valuable insights. And we hope that today's session will prove to be beneficial. And if you are interested to know more about corporate governance and compliance, we will be running 3 certification programs under the Diploma in Corporate Governance and Compliance program in the upcoming months. So this is our last cohort for this year. So if you would like to register or find out more about how these certifications align with your career goals, feel free to visit our website or for more info or speak to our training consultant. And before we end the session, I would like to get a favor from everyone to kindly answer this feedback form. It will help us to continually improve and curate more meaningful programs for you, just like this one. And this survey will also be shared in your email. So in case you have no time to answer it right now, do take your time later on as well. Yeah, you can either take a picture of this first or a screenshot. Yeah. All right, so we have now come to the end of our webinar. On behalf of the Malaysian Institute of Management and the Basel Institute on Governance, thank you once again for your time and your participation. Do follow us on social media to stay updated with our upcoming programs, and we look forward to welcoming you to our future events. Until then, stay inspired and continue to live with integrity. Thank you, everyone.